and it is putting NATO troops on Ukrainian soil, training Ukrainians for the conflict. Vladimir Putin will see that as yet another one of his 50 or 60 red lines that have been crossed and nothing's happened anyway.
British military chiefs are considering sending troops to Ukraine to train Kiev soldiers, with sources saying the plans mark the beginning of a de facto deployment of NATO military infrastructure to the country. Under the proposals, soldiers would be based in western Ukraine to provide basic intensive training to Ukrainians before they headed to the country's front lines. That's all according to exclusive from the Times defence editor Larissa Brown, and it came out on the same day that President Zelensky visited Downing Street for talks with Keir Starmer and the NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte. Well, let's speak to Philip Ingram, a former British military intelligence officer. Hello again, Philip.
Good evening.
Good evening. What do you make of these plans to extend what is known as Operation Interflex? Is this really about cutting costs, or is there something deeper going on, do you think?
I think there has to be something deeper going on, because Operation Interflex has been extremely successful in training tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians and turning them into trained soldiers before sending them back. Now, there are logistic issues getting the Ukrainians out of Ukraine and then getting them back in again. But those logistic issues are mitigated by the fact that the UK and international logistic support for training is already in this country. And taking that logistic package and taking it into Ukraine is going to be a challenge in itself. And it is putting NATO troops on Ukrainian soil, training Ukrainians for the conflict. Vladimir Putin will see that as yet another one of his 50 or 60 red lines that have been crossed and nothing's happened anyway.
Right. So you're saying that even though some will say this is a bit risky, that should be ignored because his bluff has been called previously over the months and he's done nothing about it.
Yeah, I don't think it should be ignored. It's something that needs to be watched closely, because Vladimir Putin will try and target this training, and under international law, targeting the Ukrainians under training for a conflict is legitimate. And if Western troops get injured in that, then that is down to Western governments' failure to protect them. So it's what other packages are going to have to go in to protect the training and make sure that the Russians can't fire at it. Is that going to include air defense capability? Are we talking of the next step after that is creating an air exclusion zone so that the Russians are not allowed to fly, or the Ukrainians are not allowed to fly weapon systems through the area over the training sites? How does that sit? So there's a lot of questions that will come out of this. Now, this is something that President Macron of France had proposed quite a few months ago, and had come into some wild proposals he put in suggesting that NATO troops should be deployed, or a coalition of troops should be deployed along inside the western side of Ukraine, so that the troops that are there protecting for potential threats from Belarus and other places can be freed up to go to the eastern front lines.
And Philip, you're a former military intelligence officer. Let's talk about intelligence. How concerned would you be that there might be holes in Ukrainian intelligence? We've had a number of people arrested in the past, for doing Russia's bidding. Isn't this a vulnerable area?
Well, there's always a vulnerability. Intelligence is all about trying to predict what is going to happen in the future. So you're expected to have 20/20 foresight. Well, if every intelligence officer had 20/20 foresight, we wouldn't be doing our game. We'd be winning the lottery every weekend. But the intelligence support in Ukraine and the intelligence that the Ukrainians have got is very, very good. The Ukrainians have got a very robust intelligence organization. The head of their military intelligence, General Budanov, is one of the most dynamic generals I've seen in any conflict ever, and is having a fantastic effect. And of course, he is being supported by the West. And if we put NATO troops in to train the Ukrainians, that intelligence support will have to increase, because we will be making sure that we understand any potential threats that there are against the troops that are on the ground training.
And I see that President Zelensky was at Downing Street. I'm looking at a picture of him and the Prime Minister at the moment, and also Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary-General, who said that it was legitimate for British missiles, long-range missiles, Storm Shadow, to be used to hit targets in Russia. It all depends on what the suppliers, i.e. in our case, or the Americans, decided to do. What do you think was achieved at that meeting today?
Well, I'd have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear what was achieved. I'm sure President Zelensky has put his case across very robustly yet again. This is one of Mark Rutte's first visits. He's just taken over this, as the Secretary General of NATO, so he will be making his impression on Keir Starmer and the British Defence Secretary. And the case is very sound. I personally don't understand why we are withholding permission for the Ukrainians to use a Storm Shadow missile into Russia and certainly other weapons into Russia, because the UK is already supplying weapons that the Ukrainians are using inside Russia. So there's something specific holding this up. And when you've got a weapon system that is bilaterally built, UK, France, but has got components from other countries, it's getting those diplomatic clearances that are needed to use them elsewhere. And I think we're seeing a bit of US domestic politics coming in and causing the Americans to be stepping back a little bit rather than being robust and stepping forward.
For fear that if there's an escalation and the US is brought more directly into the war just before Joe Biden leaves office, that will not look good. Is that what you think it is?
Yes, exactly. And this is where I'm disappointed in Keir Starmer and John Healey, because if you look at what happened under the last government, the UK has led the way by, we supplied main battle tanks, not many, but we broke that political impasse. We've supplied a number of different systems into Ukraine, breaking political impasses. And if Keir Starmer wanted to follow on with that, UK leading in the support to Ukraine, it's not leading in numbers, it's leading in breaking these diplomatic impasses, and he should authorise the use of Storm Shadow tomorrow.
All right. Philip Ingram, former British military intelligence officer, thank you very much indeed.
It's so good to have you here so early on in your tenure, and one of the proudest things for us as a Labour Party is being a founding member of NATO, and so to be able to welcome you here.
But it's also about the defence of the West, how we stay safe.
And I think we need to continue to make that point, which is this is of course about Ukraine's sovereignty, but it is also about... Good. Well, Secretary General, you're very welcome here. It's so good to have you so early in your tenure.
To have the trilateral with Volodymyr Zelensky, but let me also say that the UK plays a crucial role within NATO.
Earlier in the year was the strongest that we've had in difficult circumstances. So very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The annual nuclear exercise Steadfast Noon will start on Monday. We will have more than 60 aircraft involved in training sessions. The whole exercise will particularly focus on the United Kingdom, the North Sea, but also Belgium and the Netherlands. And in an uncertain world, it is vital that we test our defense and that we strengthen our defense so that our adversaries know that NATO is ready and is able to respond to any threat. It's up to the allies, the individual allies, to decide how weapons they deliver into Ukraine can be used. Legally, that is possible because legally Ukraine is allowed to use its weapons if they can hit targets in Russia, if these targets present a threat to Ukraine. But whether individual allies do that, that's in the end also always up to individual allies. Of course, we discussed this. I was last week in Kiev, we discussed it today. So really, stop worrying about a Trump presidency. We do not know who will win. I will work with Kamala Harris if she is chosen. I will work with Donald Trump when he will be chosen. And
but you're not worried about President Trump withdrawing support for Ukraine?
I'm not worried about that because I'm absolutely convinced that the US is in this because they understand that it's not only for Ukraine but also for them, and that from Washington to San Francisco, the whole of the US would be less secure if Putin would be successful in Ukraine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.